I'm a lifelong Catholic. I've been married for 46 years. I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. And I've always been loved. I hope that many of you in the crowd could say the same thing. But I've been not only loved by my parents, whose love was unconditional, but my 4 children, 5 grandchildren, 5 brothers and 1 sister, grandparents and countless aunts and uncles. I've never known one moment in my life where I wasn't loved. And on top of that, I have a Savior who loves me more than anyone can imagine. That knowledge of being loved cannot be taken for granted. Look around today, and there are countless examples of the lack of that knowledge, but more on that a little later. In biblical terms, the building block of society is the family, the domestic church. Not me, not you, but us. We are the domestic church. We are not meant to be alone. In 1988, I helped start a fathers group over at St. Ignatius. It's where I learned the 3 key things about being a man, and about being a father, and about being a friend. In that group, there was 40 to 50 guys that showed up every Friday morning from September through May. I was 33 years old at the time, and there were a number of guys in the group who were in their 60s. I remember thinking, man, those guys are old. And now, I'm one of those guys. But the relationships I built with those guys have been some of the greatest gifts in my life. Through those relationships, some of us just celebrated our 35th year of golfing together. We've had as many as 24 guys come on that weekend. But even in those relationships, there is love. How many of you can say that you have that kind of relationship with even 1 or 2 people? The genesis, if you will, of my book began in 1996. For those of you who are younger in the crowd may not remember, Grote Baker was a fairly large operation here in the city, and there used to be a supermarket chain called Biggs. And Biggs had a relationship with a school in Over the Rhine, and they asked if they could bring a group of kids out for a tour of our bakery out in the Tri-County area. And I said, sure, we'll let them come on out. So in preparation for that, I got a pound of butter, and then I took one of our 50-pound boxes of butter, put it right next to it. And I got a 5-pound bag of flour and a 100-pound bag of flour. And I had a dozen eggs and a 30-pound pail of eggs that we used. And so my thought was I would teach the kids proportions of. So I started to talk by saying, when Dad goes to the store for Mom, and she might ask him to pick up a pound of butter, this is what it looks like. And before I could get those words out of my mouth, one of the teachers is just shaking his head at me. And I got kind of uncomfortable, but I kept going. I said, if Grandma might bring over, or Grandpa brings over a 5-pound sack of sugar, and this is the 100 pounds we use, and teacher's still going like this. And I said, Dad might pick up a dozen eggs on the way home. This is a dozen eggs, and here's the 30, and the teacher's still going like this. And now I'm getting really uncomfortable. I can't understand what's going on. And so we let the kids decorate cakes. So they did that. They had icing all over themselves. But as soon as I got them situated with the icing and the cakes, I walked up to that teacher. 1996. You might remember that. I said, why were you shaking your head? He said, 50% of these kids don't have a father in their lives. I've been loved all my life. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I just didn't understand. Let's move on to 2010. This is back when the Enquirer was a real paper to read. I got it every morning. And the week before Palm Sunday in 2010, there were 8 murders in 1 week There was one a day, except one night there was two. And every day there was an article in the paper about the child that was killed, or the man that was killed. In every article, there was the grieving mother, the grieving aunt, maybe a grieving neighbor. Not one article for those 8 men or children mentioned a father. And that really hit me. And I thought, I'm going to write a letter to the editor, which I'd never done before. And I sat down and I wrote a letter to the editor, and I submitted it. This was on Friday night. And on Saturday morning, I got a call from the editor, and he said, we want your picture. And I said, what for? He says, well, we're running your picture with your article in Sunday's paper. So I sent him a picture and got my paper Sunday morning. And there was my picture, there was the article. And I thought, my mom's going to read it, maybe an aunt will read it. No one's going to read this. But in the article, I mentioned that every article, besides not mentioning a father, mentioned we need jobs and we need better education. In the first paragraph of my article, I said there's nothing wrong with jobs, there's nothing wrong with a good education. But until we start hearing a grieving father in these stories, we're not going to make a dent in this problem. So Tuesday morning, after one of my aunts did call me, but Tuesday morning I got a call from a preacher here in Cincinnati, and he said, we need to talk. And from the tone of his voice, I thought he was mad at me. But it was anything but. And he and I met over the next 3 months, and he is in the inner city, and he said, this is the biggest problem I have. There are just no fathers around for these kids. And he said, we're going to start a foundation, and we're going to start getting men to get back into their roles as fathers in their families. And we spent 6 months trying to start what we called the Abraham Foundation. We had 90 people who said they would be on our letterhead and said, go ahead, this is a great idea. But not one person gave us a dime. And there was no way we could move forward with the foundation without money. But I never forgot about the foundation. Over the next span of years, anytime I saw an article in the paper or on the internet, or somebody recommended to me an article, I'd print it out, and I came up with a folder that was 2.5 inches thick. And I came across a lot of statistics that I just could not believe, because again, it was so foreign to me. I met some incredible people. One of the gentlemen runs Teen Challenge out on the east side of town. Teen Challenge is for the worst of the worst drug offenders. If you've failed in 3 or 4 other chances of trying to get dry, you go to Teen Challenge and they're successful. And he told me that 95% of the guys and girls that come to him don't have a father in their lives. Think about that. The prison population, 85% of those in prison don't have a father in their lives. And then I came across the saddest statistic I think I've ever heard. That it's easier for a child to reconcile with the fact that his father has died than it is to reconcile with the fact that there's a man alive who wants nothing to do with him. Think about that. To go through your entire life knowing there's someone out there who wants nothing to do with you. And just this past December, there was an article, I wish everybody could read it, because it said everything I said in 2010. It was in the Wall Street Journal. And it was called The Scourge of Fatherlessness. And please allow me to read it, just a small excerpt from it. Virtually every major social pathology has been linked to fatherless children. Violent crime, drug and alcohol abuse, truancy, unwed pregnancy, suicide, and psychological disorders, all correlating more strongly with fatherlessness than any other single factor, including race and poverty. There's 13 years between my article and this article, and nothing changed. In fact, if anything, it got worse. It's rare that I go a week without seeing another article about this same topic. So how did we get here? In 1960, 5% of the children in America did not live with their fathers. In 2020, it was 50%. In 40 years, it went up 5,000%. And the Vietnam War followed. The government was found to be lying to its citizens. And don't take my word for it, take Richard Nixon's word for it, because he was quoted as saying, "We lost Cronkite." And those of you who weren't alive at that time, Walter Cronkite was like the Lester Holt of our day. Okay, everyone trusted Walter Cronkite. And when Nixon realized he had lost Cronkite, he knew he had no one to lie anymore about the war. Think about that. Think about our media today and the effect that it has. But what actually was going on in Vietnam was not what was being reported. And unfortunately, veterans took the brunt of that. They were coming back being called baby killers. And I want to stop here a second and want to say if there's any veterans in the crowd, I applaud you and thank you for your service. Any veterans here tonight? Well, next time you see a veteran, think about that. Because for 20 to 30 years, they were vilified because of lies. So then the free love movement came, Woodstock happened, drugs became rampant. And in 1973, abortion was legalized in our country. In a span of 8 to 10 years, everything seemed to be turned on its head. Now, most of you here tonight weren't born before the 90s. You've never lived when abortion wasn't legal, or fathers were more present to their family, or unwed mothers weren't supported by the government. And the need for mental health is far more needed today than ever. I came across the following a couple weeks ago. There are many today who think it's advisable for the church to change its teaching based on what the people are saying or think is right. But what is right is not always popular, and what is popular is not always right. That is true not only for the church, but for our families, our friends, and those we work with. If you could go back to live in the 60s and 70s like those of us who experienced it, you may come to understand why we have been saddled with the mores that we have today. Why it seems we're caught up in what is popular, not what is right. But enough of the bad news. Let's change to talk about the beauty of the family. Let's look at the positives of family life. I think I share a common bond with most of you here in this room. We know the joys of being a father or mother or having the love of a father and mother in our lives, the day-to-day memories that make each day a treasure. Christmas morning memories, Thanksgiving dinner memories, family vacations, weekend breakfast in our pajamas, countless birthday celebrations. Every family celebrates birthdays differently. In my family, Mom made a dinner for us on our birthday, not just when we were children, but up until the time she could no longer do it anymore in her late 80s. That was special because every meal was different. It was what you wanted. And I didn't really care what the meal was, but my mom made a lemon chiffon pie. No one made a lemon chiffon pie like Mom. I hope you have memories to share just the same way. Let's talk about coaching. Coaching, one of the greatest joys of my life. When I was 16 years old, my mother came back from signing up my brother, who was 6 at the time, to play knot-hole baseball. She said, "You're coaching your brother's team." Now, my mother was someone you didn't argue with, and so I said, okay, I'm coaching my brother's team. It was one of the greatest joys of my life. I coached those kids for 6 years. 10 years ago, I was in Home Depot. I'm walking, I hear somebody yell, "Coach Grote!" And I'm looking around, I don't recognize anybody. I hear, "Coach Grote!" I finally walk up, I said, "I'm sorry, I don't remember. He says, oh, my name's Jay. I played for you back on that team. That was the greatest experience. He said, you were a great coach and we had so much fun all the time. That, to me, that was a great joy. That was 36 years between the time I coached and the time he saw me. There are other things that kids say. I coached baseball, softball, basketball throughout the years. I coached a little bit of football. And I'm so blessed to see a lot of those kids on a regular basis and the memories, not only that I have, but that they have. I'm sure many of you could share memories of your childhood or goofy or funny things that kids said when you were growing up. I'm going to share one story with you tonight. I mentioned the bakery earlier. Well, I had two boys, and when they got to be 10 years old, one thing they wanted to do was to ride in the bakery truck. You had to be 10 years old to be able to do that. And so one morning, I got my son, we went out to the bakery and got in the truck. And my son, and my wife here can testify to this, he was quirky, but he would come up with the goofiest things at times. And in all seriousness, and he was kind of a quiet kid, but he's sitting next to me and he looks at me, he says, Dad, when's your forehead gonna stop growing? I let him out of the truck. But those are the things that you remember. Okay? That same child a few years ago said to me, Dad, you never missed one game that I played? He said, maybe one. Now, he played football, basketball, and baseball all through grade school. He played football, basketball, and ran track in high school. And he remembered that I'd been at every game. I didn't remember that, but he did. So when you have children of your own, and you think you might want to go do something else, and they've got a game, or they've got a practice you got to run them to, or they've got dance recital, think about going, because they're going to remember you were there, even though you may forget that you did. Then there are the things that kids do. And it's not the everyday, it's not things that you see on a day-to-day basis, but I'm going to explain this picture. I have a son who's now 46 years old, and about 10, 11 years ago, he was running a mini triathlon up at Houston Woods Park. And they did the swim, they did the run, the biking, and then they were going to do 3 loops around the beach area. And he had a 3-year-old son at the time. And he didn't know they were going to do the loops. But in the first loop through, he starts trying to catch up to his dad, and he can't catch up. And I said, Jake, next time through, we're going to make sure you catch up. And without me saying a word, he took his hat and put it on backward. First of all, he took his shirt off, tied it around his waist, and then put his hat backwards. And his dad came through, and he catches up with his dad, because his dad had his hat backwards and his shirt tied around his waist. And I got a picture of them literally in mid-step like this, I couldn't have had, it was a Kodak moment, okay? Kids will follow you. Young kids will follow everything you do. But think about who they follow if you're not there. And that's what we're dealing with a larger segment of our society. My book has 365 daily thoughts about being a husband, being a father, and being a friend. And each of these roles is crucial to your success in either learning how to be successful raising your kids and or loving your wife. If you get those 2 roles correct, it's amazing how your life, your wife's life, and your children's life will turn out. At the end of each day, there are 6 action thoughts that repeat depending on the message of the day. Did you tell your wife you love her today? Did you tell your kids you love them today? Did you text a friend a message of hope today? Whose day did you make today? Who did you pray for today? And say a prayer today for one of the blessings in your life. Of all the things in the book that I have, I get a lot more response about those 6 thoughts than the thoughts of the day. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those and how important they are. About telling your wife that you love her today. True story. Years ago, a priest told me that there was a woman had come to him. They'd been married for 42 years, she and her husband. And she said, we just aren't getting along. She said, I'm really worried, and I would really like to come meet with you. And so they showed up on a Saturday morning, and the priest welcomed them and then said to the wife, "So tell me, what's going wrong?" And she said, there's a lot of things, he said, but she said, "You know what? He never tells me he loves me." And he looks over to the husband and says, "What do you have to say?" And he said, I told her I loved her on the day we got married, and if I change my mind, I'll let her know." That's partly funny, but extremely sad. Okay? Think about that. Think about being in a relationship like that. Okay? The second one is, did you tell your kids you love them today? This is a more recent story. A woman was in a retirement center. She was in her late 80s. She was really struggling. She had 2 daughters that came at different times to help her out. And on one day, both the sisters came together, and the mother was getting close to the end. And she looked him in the eye and she said, "I love both of you so very much." They stayed for a little bit longer. They walked out to the car they had driven together, and they both started bawling. It was the first time they remember being told, "I love you," by their mother. Both these women were in their late 60s. Think about that. Think about all the children who aren't told they're being loved. Excuse me. I receive reactions weekly from people about my book. I get text at 5:30 in the morning regarding the day's message. I wonder where those people are when they're texting me at 5:30 in the morning. I'm not sure where all this is headed. I'm enjoying the ride. I've been speaking to fathers groups, KFC groups, Holy Name societies, corporate Catholic companies, Christian companies that have groups. God has chosen us, you and me, to be alive at this time. How will we either ignore the evidence in front of us or decide enough is enough and fight for basic human dignity and foster love between you, your spouse, and your family? And more importantly, those he places in your life who need help to see what a gift that love is. My goal is to have one child, whose father may have abandoned him, who will come back because he heard about my book or he heard about it from someone else. And that child goes on to say, "I have always been loved." I ask you to strive to hear it also. What a different place our world would be if we could start making a dent in the number of kids without a father in their lives. Won't you join me? Thank you.